Livestock Branch in Statistics Division of NASS. I will be the moderator of today's session. Mark Apodaca, Chief of the Sampling, Editing, and Imputation Methodology Branch within the Methodology Division of NASS, will be providing the first half of today's presentation. We also have with us panelist Scott Hollis, Section Head of Livestock Section, and Mike Miller, Milk Production Statistician within Livestock Section. Both Scott and Mike will assist with questions or concerns in today's session after we conclude our presentation. And before we get into today's presentation, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded and will be available with the question and answer transcripts and slides after the meeting. The closed captioning feature is available using the closed caption button on the Zoom ribbon at the bottom of the webinar. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A button on the Zoom ribbon to submit and not in the chat feature. Without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to Mark.
Thank you, Travis, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to our attendees who might be with us from our Pacific Coast region. As Travis alluded to, the focus of the first half of this presentation is just to give a general overview of the survey methodology that we have in place for our quarterly milk survey. I'll also touch a little bit on the methodology around our annual cattle survey, which is another key survey that we use to estimate our number of milk cows. Again, as Travis alluded to, we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions at the very end. And if you do have any questions that pertain to my talk, please put them in the question and answer, and I'll get to them afterwards. So I like to start all my presentations with our NASS mission. As data users of our data out there, I hope you all know our NASS mission, but it is to provide timely, accurate, and useful statistics in service to U.S. agriculture. And we meet this mission by putting out over 400 reports annually. We conduct about 200 or so unique surveys each year, all on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis. And it covers all facets of U.S. agriculture, from crop programs, livestock, to our economic survey program. In order to achieve accurate and useful statistics, we need to have a mechanism to identify our target populations. And these mechanisms that we use to identify our target populations are our sampling frames here at NASS. Our sampling frames are the foundation of what we do here in our NASS survey and census of agriculture. Without a complete sampling frame, we could have the best sample designs, the best estimators, the best response rate, but the quality of the indications will not be as accurate as it could be. The success of our estimation program depends on the quality of these frames. A sampling frame is nothing more than a listing of the populations units that we're trying to measure or make inferences about. And it allows us to select a sample with known probabilities. And that's the key, because if we have a probability-based sample, we're able to put some measures of precision around these indications. As with any frame, we want these frames to be complete, unique, and the control data that we use to target these specific target populations need to be accurate. For most of our surveys that we conduct here at NASS, we use a dual frame or a multiple frame approach to our surveys. So let's talk a little bit about the sampling frames we utilize here in NASS. There's two types of frames that we utilize here in NASS. We have a list frame and we have an area frame. Our list frame is nothing more than a huge database that contains names of operators and producers, operation names, as well as the contact information to reach out to these groups. Obviously, we have addresses, phone numbers, and emails for all our operations. Our list frame account has approximately 2 million in scope or active records currently on our list frame. Extensive effort is made to ensure that we have a complete list as possible. We work very closely with other USDA agencies to procure their lists. We use a lot of administrative data to also identify new operations. And part of our role in our field offices as state director and states and regional directors is, we have them work with some of our producer groups, some of our large commodity groups to acquire those lists, to identify any new operations that might be out there. The lists itself are maintained by a group out in our St. Louis office. We have a group of about 35 statisticians where their day-to-day work is just capturing, updating, and assuring we have the best address and phone numbers for these lists. The auxiliary data or the control data that we use to target our surveys for specific populations all come from the survey data that we collect from our respondents, as well as the census of agriculture that we conduct every 5 years. This last census, we had over 1.18 million in scope records, and all that information was then captured back to our frame to help us identify certain populations we're trying to make inferences about. As with most lists, they are incomplete. So that's one of the downfalls of these list frames. The second frame that we utilize in NASS is our area frame. The area frame is another a frame that's based on land. It's a land utilization, and that's nothing more than a listing of segments across the country. This frame in NASS is considered to be complete. That is, every farm operation is associated to a parcel of land that they operate on. The key point to keep in mind here is that our area frame needs to remain independent of our list frame. So between these two frames, we're able to identify or cover the entire target population that we're interested in. Just a little example here of the US level area frame. Again, the frame is stratified by land utilization. Your green areas on the map indicate areas where there's obviously a lot of land utilization, the upper Midwest part of the country. You could also see in the California area where a lot of the vegetable and fruit farms are located, and also all the cropland along the Mississippi Valley. Annually, we go out to about 9,000 segments each June to enumerate. The segments are about 640 acres in size. They're usually been personally enumerated. And what we do is we go out there and identify all operators that operate land within those segments. Those indications are used for our June acreage report, but we also use the June area frame to measure the incompleteness of our NASS lists. As I mentioned, most lists we have in NASS are incomplete. So the next slide there, Travis. So between the two frames we have in place here at NASS, we have our list frame, which is represented by that blue circle, and we have our area frame, which is represented by the green part of that object there. The target population is the rectangle there with the cross hatches. And as you can see, our blue circle actually does not cover the entire target population. So for our January cattle survey, we're interested in anyone in the country that has at least one head of cattle or more on their ranch or farm. Most of the incompleteness of our list frame is usually our smaller operations. We have great coverage for a lot of our larger farms. And in fact, our list frame for cattle covers around 90% of the estimate in our surveys. For our quarterly milk survey, our list frame is much more complete. Our frame for our dairy surveys cover about 97% of the target population. But it's the conjunction with our area frame that we utilize with our list sample to have a total picture of the target population. So those are the two frames that we utilize here in NASS. So focusing a little bit on the quarterly milk survey and our January cattle survey. As I mentioned, our lists have auxiliary or a control data. We maintain all cattle and calves, milk cows, and beef cows on our frame. So for our quarterly survey, we'll go to that list and identify everyone that's in business and active on our frame that has one or more inventory of milk cows. That list is then stratified by inventory to create homogeneous groups of operations. A random sample is then selected within each strata. The sample sizes are pretty much based to target a level of precision at the US level. For our US level estimates that we set, our sample size is based to target a level of precision of about 1%. And that level of precision is measured by our coefficient of variation, or our CV. For our cattle, our dairy surveys, we also target a level of precision of about 1%. But for our dairy and quarterly milk surveys, we also have to have a sufficient number of reports to set some of our alfalfa and corn silage price estimates. And I'll show you a little example here shortly of what a stratification looks like for one of our list frames in one of our key states. Now, the area sample is strictly used for our January and July cattle surveys. Again, the area component is used to measure the incompleteness or the undercoverage of our list frames. Farms that we identify in June that are not eligible to be included on our list are then sampled and included in our January and July surveys. Again, there is no NOL component for our quarterly milk surveys. And again, that's mostly because that list is so complete. Approximately 97% of all our estimates come from the list frame for our dairy surveys. The next slide here just gives a little example of what that stratification would look like for one of our major quarterly milk states. Again, the first column is the strata number, and then the middle column there is the description. So, in that first strata, anyone on our list frame that has between 1 and 29 head, we have approximately 1,700 entities in that frame, and we're going to select a sample of approximately 116 records from that group. So each record that we select from that sample is technically representing a little under 15 other farms within that strata. One thing you'll notice as you go from your lower strata to your larger strata, that sampling weight decreases. And that is typically the case for most of our surveys in NASS. We sample the larger operations a lot heavier than we do the smaller operations because they are so critical to the estimate, and they do account for a large proportion of the inventory for these surveys. In this case, anyone over 2,000 head of dairy cows are included with the probability of 1 in our sample. So for our sample sizes for our January and July survey, cattle surveys, again, it's a survey where we set state and national level estimates in January. So we go after about 35,000 samples for the January survey. And that's out of a population of close to 700,000 records on our list rank. So that's a very small proportion of the total population. Approximately about 4% of the population is sampled in January. Our July cattle survey is only a national level estimate, so we do not need the precision at the state level as we do in January. And that sample size drops to a little over 19,000 samples. Both January and July surveys do have an NOL component. Again, that is the portion of the area tracts that we identified that were not part of our list. So between the list and the area sample, it provides complete coverage of our target population. Our quarterly milk survey is a sample size of about 12,000 each quarter. And that sample is designed so that we have enough overlap from quarter to quarter to measure not only inventory and milk per cow or rate per cow, but it also provides us the ability to measure change from quarter to quarter. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to our estimators. Once the samples have been selected, the data is mailed out. Typically, our survey periods run about a week to 2 weeks. In that time, all the samples need to be accounted for and edited. The main data collection mode that we use for our quarterly milk survey is computer-assisted telephone interviewing, or CATI. We do some mail survey as well, and a small proportion of our responses do come from the web. We are making a big push to try to get more people to fill out the questionnaires on the web. Much more efficient and a little less burden because you're able to route the respondents to key areas based on how they report. Once the data is collected, we do run all the data through an internal editing instrument. These editing tools are there to ensure internal consistency within the questionnaire. Identifies any inconsistencies. Perhaps we entered an extra 0 or we didn't quite understand the question correctly. But what this editing instruments do is it helps us assure that we have within record consistency. Once that data does get cleaned up, we then look at that data in a macro level view or in our analysis tools. These tools are interactive in nature. They visually present the data, usually by strata or more like by location. But what these tools help us understand is that, first of all, it helps us readily identify outliers in our data, large atypical records. Our analysts then look at that record, make sure that data is correct, and then they assess the impact these records may have on our final survey indications. Along with these analysis tools, we also present previous survey results to help them understand any big shifts in production and help us identify which records might have led to that shift. For most surveys we conduct in NASS, just talking a little bit about our non-response adjustments, the milk production survey is voluntary. Most of the surveys we conduct in NASS are voluntary, with the exception of our Census of Ag and our Census of Ag follow-on studies. So somehow we need to account for the non-respondents. The way we account for non-response in our livestock surveys is through a re-rating process. If you think back to that stratification we had in that smaller stratum, each record was representing about 15 other dairy farms in that particular group. Suppose we have a response rate of 50% in that group, that weight would then get adjusted up by 2. So each record that did respond is now representing 30 others. So as our response rates decrease, the level of precision around our indications will increase. So we try as much as we can to get the word out to assure that we get good response for these surveys. It's critical that we get the responses from our farmers. The adjustments at non-response are made at the stratum level. And again, each stratum represents a homogeneous group of other operations of similar size and type. So all adjustments we make for a non-response are done at the strata level. For our very large and complex farms, as in most surveys, these are farms that are in that unbounded strata. If you recall back to that slide that had the 2,000 plus, these operations are so large, we need to account for these if they don't respond by manually estimating for these records. And this manual estimation is handled by our analysts in our regional field offices. So once all the data has been collected, passed through our internal editing instrument, looked at that, analyzing it visually through macro level views, we're ready to now summarize that data. So we have estimators that we have in play to take that survey level data and expand it up to generate totals for the population we're interested in making inferences about. For our quarterly milk survey, we would generate direct expansions for total number of milk cows, total milk production. We also generate what we call survey to survey ratios or within survey ratios. Ratios is another form of a direct expansion, but this is taking a numerator and a denominator. So for instance, to generate our milk per cow, we're going to take the total milk production divided by the total number of milk cows milked. And in order to be used in that ratio, both numerator and denominator need to be positive. Additionally, for generating our survey to survey or quarter to quarter ratios, if a respondent is a good response in both quarters or both surveys, we then generate a matched survey ratio, which also provides our statistics division commodity stats with another indication on measure of change from survey to survey and quarter to quarter. Finally, as with all surveys that we conduct in NASS, there's going to be errors around our indications and our estimates. There's two types of errors that we have in place for our surveys. The sampling error is basically an error that's generated because we're taking a sample from our population rather than a complete census. The errors for this sampling error, as I mentioned earlier, is measured by our coefficient of variation, or our CV. These CVs are evaluated annually by our sample design section in headquarters. And if we consistently miss a target CV, which usually range at about 1 to 2% at the US level and about 4 to 5 at the critical state level, we then evaluate our sample sizes, our sample design, our frame coverage to see we have a sufficient coverage on our frame. And then we make modifications to try to bring that target CV back more in line with what we're trying to achieve. All other errors associated with the survey are what we refer to as our non-sampling errors. These are errors that come about through a reporting of the respondent. Perhaps they didn't quite understand the way we're asking the question. Recording of the record of the data onto the form often leads to errors. We may key an extra zero or omit a zero. The editing instrument is another source of potential non-sampling errors if we don't have consistent logic in there. A non-response error and coverage error are other types of errors we see on the non-sampling error type. But to minimize these errors, I hope I can impress upon you that we have several quality control checks in place throughout our survey process. I talked a little bit about our sampling frames. We try to do everything we can to have a complete frame as possible. We work closely with our NASDA enumerators to assure that they understand the questionnaire and the content that we're trying to capture from our respondents. We train our staffs around the survey program. Our editing systems are state of the art, our editing and analysis tools. So throughout the whole survey process, we have several quality control mechanisms in place to assure that we minimize that non-sampling error. That pretty much just gives you a general overview. I know I kind of went through it very quickly, but a lot of this information, as you heard Dan Carestes allude to in his opening session, is in our quality metrics report. The link here would point you to the quality metrics around our milk production survey and our January cattle surveys. You'll go into more detail around the survey methodology associated with those. In those quality metrics, you'll find the sample size associated with these studies, the survey response rates, as well as our item response rates, as well as our coefficients of variations, or our CVs. So with that, I just wanted to, again, just give a general overview of the methodology. I'm now going to turn it over to Travis Averill. He's going to take us the rest of the way through the survey process from the time they get our survey indications to the publication of the official estimate.
Thank you, Mark. In the next half of today's presentation, I will cover the following 4 items for the NASS milk production program. First being the monthly milk production. Second will be licensed dairy herds, followed by the monthly all milk price program. And the last one I'll wrap up is the production, disposition, and income report that we publish annually at NASS. So here's a visualization for the milk production program for the 50 states. Publish monthly estimates for milk per cow, and production for the 24 major states are the dark yellow on the map here, whereas the quarterly states are the lighter colored states. Just a couple of notes here. The July 21st milk production report, the milk cow inventory was at 9.5 million head. And in 2020, the production of milk in the United States was 223 billion pounds. A visual overview of the distribution of milk cow inventory in the United States based on the most recent Census of Agriculture, which was completed for 2017. And you can see there's some concentrations of milk cows in the various states. California, you can see here in the West, there's a good amount of cluster there. Then you go up to Idaho and the Texas Panhandle, there's some clusters of dairy operations. And then you move up to Wisconsin, that state has a lot of dairy cluster farms. And then you move east and you can see New York and Pennsylvania has some large groups of dairy operations there. And it'll be interesting when NASS conducts the 2022 Census of Agriculture, how the data will compare over those 5-year comparisons. And the next 3 maps of the United States I'll be illustrating the milk cow inventory, the annual rate per cow, and the annual production from 2020 in comparisons to 2019. And this first map is the 2020 inventory annual average was 9.4 million head, up 51,000 head from 2019. As you can see, the 2020 cow numbers were down in the far west, the southeast, and the northeast. However, we're seeing expansions in the Mideast, that being Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, in the Great Plains, and some western states. The Mideast states have seen a lot of expansion, likely due to new processing plant in Michigan, and we're seeing a lot of expansions in South Dakota, just to note. This next map, the rate per cow in 2020 was up 382 pounds from 2019. As you look across the 48 states, rates were up in most states except 9 states showing a decline. Those are illustrated in red here. And the last map I have talking about the US production, 2020 comparison 2019, production was up 2.2%. Most states in the Southwest and Plains were up, along with the upper Midwest, Mideast, Pennsylvania, and New York, whereas production declines in New Mexico, along with several states in the Southeast and Northeast, were down year over year. The key component of our milk production program at NASS is the monthly milk production report. NASS conducts a quarterly survey, as Mark alluded to in his portion of the presentation, January, April, July, and October, using a sample of all known operations with at least 1 milk cow. And NASS publishes for all 50 states in the US in the 4 quarterly months, using both survey and administrative data to establish those estimates. In the remaining months, where there is no survey data, NASS uses only administrative data and publishes for the 24 major producing states and the United States. Just to note that the 24 major producing states account for 95% of the US milk production. In the monthly milk production report, estimates are published for the number of milk cows, milk per cow, and milk production for the respective months. Whereas the most recent month is considered a preliminary estimate at NASS, although for 2 months prior, those estimates can be revised. Revisions are based on administrative data. The report is typically released around the 19th of the month. The last bullet on the slide is a link to the NASS website that provides information on monthly milk estimates and reports. A question that is often asked: how does NASS estimate monthly milk per cow? NASS starts with a value based on survey data for the quarters January, April, July, and October, or administrative data, where the option is to set milk production based on available production from administrative data, last derived milk cow number based on the production divided by the monthly or quarterly rate that's provided. Note, if the derived milk cow number is not reasonable, the commodity stat will adjust the rate to improve the relationships. Although in the quarterly surveys, months there are indications for milk cows to assist in that milk per cow rate. The NASS relies heavily on administrative data from various sources to estimate milk production. The main source of administrative data is USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, Federal Milk Market and Orders. The US is divided into marketing orders. As you can see on the map below, since California federal order was added, there are 11 orders in the United States. As you can see on the map too, there are some areas in the country that are white that are not covered by a federal milk marketing order. NASS also incorporates state administrative data from CDFA in California, the New York Dairy Promotion Order in New York, Maine Milk Commission, the Missouri State Milk Board, the Montana Milk Control Bureau, and the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board. In addition to those two administrative sources, the last source is the dairy checkoff, where 15 cents per hundredweight of milk sold is collected from producers, which is mandatory, and funds are used to promote the demand and sales of milk. Dairy organizations in various states collect the checkoff data. The second topic of today's presentation is licensed dairy herds. NASS publishes annually in the February Milk Production Report. This report provides the number of dairy herds licensed to sell milk by the state or a regulatory agency. All 50 states in the United States are accounted for in this report. And then one might ask, how can one retrieve the licensed dairy herd through the NASS's quick stats? As it can be tricky to find data on quick stats, on this slide I have provided a snapshot of how to retrieve the data on a state and national level basis. So first you go to your quick stats. In that program, you're going to select survey. Sector will be animals and products. Group will be livestock. Commodity is cattle. Category is inventory average. That's the tricky part here that most people get stuck on, is the inventory average is the category. Data item will be cattle, cows, milk, licensed herd, operations with inventory average. The domain is by default total. Geographic level, as I stated, if you're trying to get the national and state level, you hold your control button on your keyboard and select both, and that'll bring them the national and all the states forward. Though if you want individual states instead of all of them, you would actually have to come over to the state box, drop down, and select those states and use the control feature too there. The years I have here illustrated on the slide is for 2020 and 2019. The period type is annual. The period is year. You select the get data. And then once you have completed this process, you have 4 choices to view and save the data. First is to save. The second option is a spreadsheet, which will be a CSV file. The third option is printable. And the last option is a map, which allows a user to visualize the data on a map of the United States and how they compare state by state basis, which is a neat feature that QuickStats does have. The third topic in today's presentation is the monthly all milk prices. NASS publishes milk prices in the monthly agriculture prices report. In the most recent release on September 30th, 2021, the milk all price for August 2021 was $17.70 per hundredweight. That is down 90 cents from the previous year and down 20 cents from the July 2021 price. All milk price represents the gross price farmers in the state received in the given month per hundredweight of milk sold at average fat test. The gross price prior to deductions for items such as hauling and stop charges, advertising and promotion costs, and co-op dues. It does not include hauling subsidies, but does include the premiums and discounts for quality, quantity, and other reasons. The price per hundredweight equals total gross receipts divided by pounds of milk sold and multiplied by 100. Each month, NASS surveys plants and utilizes administrative data for each of the 24 major milk producing states to derive milk prices. The administrative data comes either from federal milk marketing orders or co-ops. The survey data is received by NASS from the plants. NASS calculates the U.S. all milk price by weighting the estimated all milk price in each of the 24 states by production in the states during the same month in the previous year. The last topic of today's presentation is milk production, disposition, and income, which is published annually in April. The report provides total milk production, milk marketed, milk for home and farm use, the average annual all milk price, which we consider the market year average price, cash receipts, gross income, value of milk production. Here are a couple calculated items, part of the PDI report. Cash receipts equals milk marketed times the all milk price. And the gross income is the cash receipts minus the value of home use. The value of home use is derived from the quantity of home use times the all milk price. And the value of production is equal to the gross income minus the value fed to livestock. And the value fed to livestock is derived from the quantity fed to the livestock multiplied by the all milk price. Just want to thank everyone that attended today's session. All reports are available at the NASS official website. This concludes the presentation. And if anyone has a question, you can either enter it in the question feature or raise your hand to ask your question. If we do run out of time to answer questions, we will provide the Q&A transcript and have answers to the questions that were submitted and not answered after the meeting. Just a reminder, as a question is answered, it will move to the answer tab in the Zoom ribbon function. All participants will receive an email to complete an evaluation form on Friday. We strongly encourage everyone to complete an evaluation to get feedback on the meeting and suggestions for improvements. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll start to answer questions. So the first question we have is, I'm interested in the overhead for dairy producers that has changed to only being published twice a year, May and October, I believe. Are there plans for that to be more frequently generated? That's not a report that comes from NASS. So that's probably a reference to something at the Agricultural Marketing Service dairy program. Can we receive the second question? Everyone will receive a copy of the recording, or the recording will be saved out there for people to access later. So that the recordings will be a link that can be shared or viewed later after today's session. One question is, what is administrative data? We consider administrative data that is actually not from a survey. So if we're getting data that might be collected from another USDA agency or State Department that collects it, that's what we consider administrative data that is not actually associated with our surveys of data collection processes. Mike, is there any more to add to administrative data, or Scott?
No, that covers it. It's like you said, data that's not it would be non-survey data. So data that we get from any other source other than a survey would be what we consider administrative data.
Right. And luckily for milk, we have quite a bit of, probably more than any other commodity in our group. We have a lot of administrative data that we have access to, so that helps us only survey on the quarters.
The next question we have is, I'm interested in more detail around the acceptable CV error rate at the state level. The speaker mentioned 4 to 5% difference is acceptable. What does that mean? Mark, you want to take that?
Sure. So good question. So, the best precision around our survey indications is at the national level because the sample size is the largest at that level. So, typically for a lot of our major surveys, whether it's a crop acreage or inventories for our livestock, we're targeting a CV of about 1% at the US level. Now, for some of our critical states that have the large amount of that total production or total acreage, we won't be as precise in those states, but we will still target a CV in the 3 to 5% range. As you get further away from being a large production state, we may let that CV go as high as 10 to 15%. So, we have policy and standard memorandums where we have target CVs for all our national estimation programs. But again, the key there is the indication is the most precise at the US level, and those precision levels are usually in the 1 to 2%. I did put just a textbook answer into the administrative data use in there as well, Travis and Scott, just for the group's reference. I want to talk a little bit about administrative data. We are working really hard to partner up with our FSA agency to utilize more of their data that they collect. They just had the coronavirus food assessment program. We're utilizing a lot of that information to help build our list frames. We're also doing a lot of record linkage work with the FSA data to try to get lat long on our list frame. So there's a lot of different, sources or uses of the administrative data that's out there. FSA acreage data is also used in our crop acreage estimation program. So there's several different types of information we use from that administrative data source.
The next question is, how do you calculate a milk production per cow as part of the DRP program at time of endorsement? I believe that USDA is providing this number. Mike, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, what program was that mentioned there?
Part of the DRP program at time of endorsement, acronym DRP.
Well, I'm not for sure. I'm assuming do they use our published milk per cow? I'm assuming they do.
That's my guess. Jacob, do you mind elaborating on your question? That would maybe help us to answer your question, or it might be something another agency would actually have that answer. The next question is that the CV rate public or internal?
I believe that is publicly available. We could be FOIA'd, I guess, Freedom of Information Act to provide that information. I will definitely check with our upper management to make sure, but it is a policy and standard memorandum that we do maintain internally. And, if you want to send us an email, which surveys you're interested in, what our CV targets are. Again, these are just guidelines that we try to target. As response rates decrease, our CVs tend to get a little larger, but for the most part, we are holding pretty good at meeting our target CVs. And we actually put an annual internal report to kind of measure how many times we hit or miss the CV. And it could be, one quarter we just had a large atypical outlier that could have driven up that CV. So, it has to be missed consistently before we take any action. But I believe that information is publicly available, and we could share that. But we will definitely follow up and get back to you on that one.
Good question. Next question is, any of the survey data estimated?
I'll go ahead and take that. Yes, for our largest entities, if we do not get a response, we will have the regional field office, the statistician in that office, manually estimate. It's called manual imputation instead of a machine algorithm. Again, usually these entities are in our surveys, and we have a pretty good information around them. There are some items that we do not allow to be estimated. I'm pretty sure for our milk per cow, we do not have them estimate a rate per cow, but we will have them estimate the number of milk cows associated with that entity.
Thanks, Mark. Going back to the question, how do you calculate a milk production per cow pounds as part of the dairy revenue production milk insurance program at time of endorsement. I believe that USDA is providing this number. That comes from RMA. And so, Mike, I don't think we have anything to contribute to that, do we?
Other than, I mean, I'm assuming that they must use our published milk per cow. So, and Travis did talk about that. He mentioned we get the survey. From that survey, we can get, you can look at like rate of change in that survey rate from previous quarter, previous year. We get administrative data every month for some states. We can also use that administrative data to look at change from previous month, change from previous year, and to use that information to estimate a rate for the current month or current quarter. But ultimately, the best data we have is our administrative data for production. And so you estimate a cow number best you can based on the survey data. We have our production number based on administrative data that's solid. Divide the production by cows, and that derives it. And so if that rate doesn't look correct based on what we know about what rates would normally do from month to month or quarter to quarter, you may make some adjustments to the cows. Try to stay within the parameters of the survey indications or the rate indication, the administrative data rate indications. Try to stay in those parameters and have estimate a reasonable rate per cow.
Appreciate that, Mike. Next question, it seems that total milk production for the country or even region or state can be pretty accurate because of the milk checkoff data. But for cow numbers based on surveys, I wonder because I know how many dairymen do not respond or respond accurately to the cow number reports. As Mark stated in his presentation, he was discussing how those CVs and the precision there was in the quarterly report. So that would cover those surveyed milk cow numbers from quarter to quarter. Do you want to elaborate more, Mark, on that? Or
again, we hope that respondents report honestly. I would think there'd have to be a lot of collusion out there to really move that number, significantly. We conduct these surveys annually, quarterly, so we do have a lot of history. We do make comparisons from the previous quarter as well. Those are those survey to survey ratios that also provide a gauge as to how that inventory levels have changed. The Census of Agriculture is a mandatory survey. We often, we have that as a check as well. But yeah, response and how they respond is critical. For the largest operations, if we don't get a good response, we will manually estimate. But yes, it'd have to take a lot of collusion, I guess, to really move that number. Alternatively to, through our estimation approach, we didn't go into some of the balance sheets and the tracking of our indications. And we know there's biases associated with some of our survey indications. We track these over time. And, if that bias is consistent, we could actually factor that into when we set some of our official estimates. But please report honestly.
and that's important. I mean, the data is only as good as our respondents' collaboration to our surveys, and it's important that the producers understand the importance of our data and how the data from NASS is used across all of USDA and other programs and policy making. So it's critical for the industries to truly have the data that's necessary for the policies to be driven. And Mike or Scott, do you want to add any additional comments to that question?
No, I don't have anything, but I was just going to say what you just said. Is the data that we put out is only as good as what we are provided. So we do a lot of outreach to get people to understand why the data is needed and what it's used for. So we do spend a lot of time on that, educating people. So, but it's only as good as the data we receive.
Mike, do you want to say anything or you have anything to add?
He has covered it, and Mark did a good job covering that question.
Okay, and I mean, administrative data, that also is, Mike alluded to a little bit ago in one of the previous questions. When that administrative data comes in, you're seeing that and you have some disparity going on, and Mark alluded to our analysis systems that we have built in to review the data at an operation level and state processes. That whole process is designed to try to mitigate outliers or data issues to be impacting our data without some processes to review or to verify what's actually going on. So there's a lot of built-in checks into what we do at NASS for all of our programs, and milk production is one of them. That it also helps to have that administrative data to assist in the processes to help make sure the rates make sense on a monthly basis and what the production is and cow numbers. And we also look at slaughter. So what dairy slaughter is doing on a monthly basis in the regional components, that also feeds in to assist Mike in setting those numbers too. So
yeah, I think that administrative data for milk production really keeps the whole, keeps everything, all of our milk production estimates really in line, because if we see big changes in milk production, pretty good indication that there's something going on with cows too. So, and milk production per cow tends to be very seasonal and tends to follow very consistent month-to-month patterns over time. So that kind of keeps us in line too when we're estimating our rates. So combine that with our survey data and with administrative data on rate per cow, I think the estimates are, I think they're pretty good.
appreciate that. Thank you everyone for contributing to that question. The next question we have is piggybacking on the response rate issue. With the amount of consolidation going on, have you seen larger entities being less transparent than traditional smaller farms over time? Mike, you want to take that?
So the question was, are the large entities, do they tend to be less transparent than the smaller entities?
That's correct.
As far as reporting on surveys?
Yes.
Well, I think from what I've seen, that I don't know that you can say that that's necessarily always the case. I guess you notice the big ones that don't report because they're the ones that you're the ones that have the big impact on the estimates. Those are ones that you'd really like to get. And when you see the one doesn't respond, then that really stands out to you. I think we have small ones that don't report also. So I guess my first inclination might be that the small ones might be more likely to report than the big ones, but we have good response rate on the big ones too. So I don't know that you can say that the big ones are necessarily more likely to refuse.
Right. Mark, did you want to add anything to that?
I think you guys touched on it again. Some of the things that, we try to do as far as our regional directors out in the field office and our state statuses is to build the rapport with these large entities, work on some operating arrangement, reporting arrangements. As you saw in my slide, these large operations tend to sample at a higher rate. And, they are in the survey, more frequently than some of the smaller ones, especially in our cattle surveys. They have so many cattle operations. If you're a small cattle operation, you probably won't be sampled for many years, whereas your larger ones, you're going to have a higher probability of being included. But again, the key is, building rapport with these large entities, working out reporting arrangements, maybe working with their accountants to provide this information. So, that's what our task is to try to get as best estimate we can and the best response rate.
Correct. The last question we have, and it'll probably wrap up the session because we're getting closer to the 3 o'clock time frame. Jeff says, I think you guys do a great job. Appreciate that. I think the dairy revenue protection and crop insurance program now uses your milk per cow data to adjust the indemnities, a 3 to 5% error in state data can result in literally millions of dollars of changes to indemnity payments. That's true. And I mean, depending on what state it is, that will vary. But like Mark stated, our quarterly survey in the CVs are really pretty good for milk production. So, but yeah, 3 to 5% error in a state could potentially have an impact. But I think if we were to if you look at our reports and go to our 24 major producing states that account for 95% of the US milk production, the impact there, you'd see that probably wouldn't be as severe as that you're alluding to. And again, it goes back to like a lot of us at NASS always say the importance of our producers in the United States is for them to, if they get a survey in the mail, it is important for them to complete it out with integrity and accuracy of their operation, because we're only able to do with what data we receive. We have administrative data to assist and monitor and analysis and editing systems in place to try to mitigate any outliers or potential concerns that would impact any of the commodities we're working on. So for milk production, we're trying to make sure we're doing our best job possible to make sure the data is reflective of what and transparent of what's actually going on at a given month or on an annual basis. Anyone else want to contribute to that?
I think you hit it good. I was just pulling up the quality metrics to see what some of these CVs, but that would be a good source to go look at that quality metrics document. They do, present the CVs by state, and looking at the last one we put out at the U.S. level, the CV around the rate per cow was 0.5%. So that's pretty tight, similar to with the number of milk cows. So, that the precision at the U.S. level is very tight, and I'm just trying to see here what some of the CVs were at some of the major states. Yeah, it looks like a lot of the major states are all within that 1 to 1.5% range. Just looking at Wisconsin and California here. California, we had a CV of 1.3%. So, a little better. And that goes to, the proportion of the population we sample. We do sample our milk population a little heavier than some of our other populations. Looking at Wisconsin, we're a little under 2% at 1.7%. So, our major states, it looks like our CVs are all in the 1 to 2% range, with the US at about 0.5% CV.
And I'd just like to emphasize, Travis, that that's out in the field offices work really hard when we do our surveys every quarter, and they look at that, spend a lot of time looking at that data and looking for outliers, looking for potential problem records. And I look at that data too. And so we go over that data pretty thoroughly. And we look at the administrative data too and watch for anything that looks out of line. And so I think, the data that we're using to make these estimates they've been gone over very carefully, and I feel pretty good about the estimates that we're putting out there.
Very well said, Mike.
Thank you. We're at the 3 o'clock and we're supposed to cut it off at 3. If your question, I see there's one question left. If panelists, if you don't mind, we can answer that one. And just a reminder, tomorrow we start back up at 12 to go to 3. So we'd enjoy everyone to participate and join tomorrow's sessions too. Hopefully it's been very informative and helpful, these discussions. And the last question, does NASS take into account weather and feed situation information in assessing if milk per cow drop or lower than usual growth is due to measurement error or genuine shocks to cow productivity? Mike, you want to take a?
Well, I think things like that definitely help explain when we see big drops in milk production per cow. We can look at things like high feed costs, for example. We know, or drought, or extreme weather like what we've seen in the Northwest, extreme drought, hot weather, or in the Southwest, we've seen that. And that impacts the feed supply, impacts the feed cost. And so those things help explain when you big drops in milk per cow, or when you see the cow numbers decline. I think those types of situations definitely help explain when we need to see big drops per cow, drops in milk per cow, drops in milk cow numbers. When you have major weather events in the winter, that definitely helps explain some dips in milk per cow. So definitely weather events and feed costs. We definitely take that into consideration when we're looking at these estimates.
And going back to our regional offices, when they're actually setting those estimates, they're staying in tune. Our data collection processes have the ability to, if a data item shows a difference from previous quarter, previous year, ranges are outside of a certain range that is established for editing purposes, it triggers a comment or asks for clarification. So we have some systems built in to get some of those comments when those things do occur, that if it's a drought or weather or pricing of feed sources where they actually have to change feed sources because the prices are too high, especially with the milk prices wherever they're at that given time. Dairy farmers are trying to be cost effective and efficient with their resources. So I appreciate everyone. Thank you for the participation today. I do feel it's very helpful, good questions from everyone that asked them. And if you have any questions after today's presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us and ask questions. We're available to answer questions and whatever you have, and we'll try to answer and assist you as best possible. And don't forget to complete the evaluation form. And thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care, everyone.